I didn't expect her to hug me. That part I had already prepared for. The distance. The way people look at you when you come back from somewhere they only understand through headlines. You learn to carry that quietly. But I didn't expect the door to close that fast. She stood there in the light of that house, glass, steel, everything clean and sharp like it had never known dust, and looked at me like she was trying to place a face from a dream she didn't want to remember. "You look like a ghost," she said. Not angry, not even cold, just certain. Then the door shut. I stood there longer than I should have. Long enough for the rain to soak through the jacket I hadn't replaced since deployment. Long enough to realize no one was coming back to open it again. I didn't knock. There's a point where knocking stops being about entry and starts being about dignity. So I turned around and drove. The gas station sat where it always had, just off the highway, leaning into its own neglect. The sign flickered like it couldn't decide whether to give up or keep pretending. Dad used to say it paid for everything. School, that house, even the car she drove now. Standing there I couldn't see how. Inside it smelled like old oil and something damp that never quite dried. The counter was still there. The shelves mostly empty. It looked less like a business and more like something waiting to be remembered. I didn't turn on all the lights. Just one above the register. Enough to see. It felt quieter than it should have, not peaceful. Just paused. I found a blanket in the back office that probably hadn't been washed in years and sat down on the floor, back against the wall. My body still hadn't relearned how to relax indoors. Every small sound had edges. I wasn't thinking about her, not directly. Just the way she had said it. Ghost, like I had already left once and wasn't supposed to come back. I don't know how long I sat there before I noticed the hatch. It was behind a stack of crates in the storage room. Half hidden. Not locked. Just ignored. I didn't remember it from before, but that didn't mean much. There were a lot of things I hadn't paid attention to back then. I moved the crates slowly. Not out of caution, just habit. You don't rush into unknown spaces anymore. Not after a while. The metal handle was cold. For a second, I thought about leaving it. Closing the door. Sleeping on the floor and dealing with everything in the morning like a normal person. But nothing about that day had been normal. So I pulled. The hatch opened with a sound that felt louder than it should have. The kind of noise that makes you pause and listen, even when there's no one around to hear it. A set of narrow stairs led down. The air that came up was cooler, cleaner somehow. Not like the rest of the station. There was a light already on below. That's what made me stop. Not the stairs. Not the dark. The light. Someone had been down there. Or expected someone to come. I went anyway. Each step felt deliberate. Like I was choosing something I didn't fully understand yet. At the bottom, the space opened into a room that didn't belong under a gas station. Concrete walls, shelving units, filing cabinets, a desk, organized. That's what struck me first. Dad had never been organized upstairs. Papers everywhere. Receipts shoved into drawers. But down here everything had a place. Boxes labeled in his handwriting. Dates, initials. Some I recognized. Some I didn't. I opened one. Inside were files, not personal ones, business records, property agreements, contracts tied to the land the station sat on, and more land around it than I remembered. I kept going. Another box. Then another. It started to form a picture I hadn't been given. The station wasn't just a station. It was the center of something larger. Old leases. Rights of way. Agreements with companies that had come and gone over the years. Infrastructure plans. Expansion proposals that had never been completed, and buried in the back of one cabinet, legal documents that were newer. Signed, transferred, to me. I sat down at the desk because it was the closest thing to steady. It didn't feel like winning. That wasn't the word. It felt like being handed something mid-sentence, expected to understand the rest without context. Upstairs, everything looked abandoned. Down here, nothing was. I didn't sleep that night. By morning I had read enough to know two things. First, the station wasn't worthless. Not even close. It was tied to land and agreements that made it relevant. Quietly. Structurally. Second, the responsibility wasn't optional. There were obligations in those documents. Timelines. Clauses that required action. People who would come looking, not for money, but for decisions. I hadn't been left nothing. I had been left something unfinished. The first call came before noon. A number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. A firm. Legal. They asked for me by name, like they had been waiting for confirmation that I existed in more than paperwork. There was no confusion in their tone. No hesitation. Just expectation. We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. I cleaned up before I went. Not for them. For myself. When I got there, they didn't ask where I had been. They didn't comment on how I looked. They treated me like someone stepping into a role that had already been defined. It was easier that way. They walked me through what I had already started to piece together. The station. The land. The pending negotiations that had stalled after Dad died. He didn't separate assets randomly. One of them said. He divided exposure. I didn't respond right away. The house, clean, visible. Finished. The station, buried. Ongoing, complicated. It made a certain kind of sense. By the time I left, there was a path forward, not simple, not quick, but real. Driving back, I passed her street without turning. Not out of anger, just timing. A few days later, she came to the station. I saw her car before I saw her. It didn't belong there. Too polished, too intact. She stood inside the doorway the same way I had stood at hers, not stepping fully in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her eyes moved around the place, taking it in. The dust. The half-lit interior. The parts I hadn't fixed yet. Then she looked at me. "You're staying here?" she asked. "For now." A pause. "I didn't know." She started, then stopped. I didn't help her finish. There are some sentences people have to decide to complete on their own. She glanced toward the back, toward where the hatch was hidden, though she couldn't see it. "Dad didn't tell me much about this place," she said quietly. "I know, that was the closest we got to agreement." She nodded once, like she was filing something away. "I shouldn't have said that," she added. "About you." I let that sit for a second. "You weren't wrong?" I said. "I just wasn't gone." That seemed to land somewhere she didn't expect. We didn't resolve anything after that. No big conversation. No clearing of everything that had built up between us. She left the way she came. Carefully. But the next time she looked at me, it wasn't like I was something that had already passed through. And that was enough.